Right, and good corporate governance is what we're discussing this morning, and we know is a key factor in underpinning the integrity and efficiency of a company. Poor corporate governance can weaken a company's potential, can also lead to financial difficulties, and in some cases can cause long-term damage to a company's reputation. A company which applies the core principles of good corporate governance, which might be fairness, accountability, responsibility, transparency, and others, will usually outperform other companies and will be able to attract investors whose support can help to finance further growth. And that is what we'll be discussing here with our panelists this morning. And of course, you can help me drive the show as well. You can hit us on Twitter. AM Live NTV is a Twitter handle. AM Live NTV is a profile name on Facebook, and 20505 is our SMS portal. So we want to hear from you as well. What do you understand about good corporate governance? Of course, given also the companies that we have in this country, many of them or some of them really going down the tubes because of not having good proper governance. What does it portend for us even as we're now embarking on 2018? Will we go with the same trajectory or not? Right. Allow me to introduce our guests who are here with us this morning. Of course, they will help us understand what is good corporate governance. And some of them, you know them, some of them, you've never seen them. Some of them, of course, you've seen them in other arenas, especially in the business sector as well. And they'll be here to tell us more about what they understand by good corporate governance. Right. I will introduce to you Catherine Musakali. She is the founder of Dorian Associates. Also, she's advocate of the High Court. Also, we do have with us Charles Mushene. Charles Mushene is the chair, East African Breweries Limited. We have with us also Linus Gitahi. It's good to have my boss back. Welcome. Yes, yes, he's still my boss. And he's here also to talk to us about good corporate governance. He is the chair of AIB. That will tell you much more also in the course of the program. Of course, we have the profiles. And also we do have Dr. Njenga. Dr. Njenga is here with us. He's the Dean of Business, Strathmore Business School. Thank you very much. Maybe we can just get down now to the brass tacks, as we normally say, and we take the plunge on trying to understand what good corporate governance is. First of all, let's just drop the good. Corporate governance. What do you understand by corporate governance? Let's just begin with you, Catherine.
Thank you very much. Good morning, viewers. For me, I would like to look at good corporate governance as the way in which we lead this corporate entity.
Yes.
Based on a number of pillars. If you think about a family, for example, there are certain norms that drive each family. There are certain norms that each family subscribes to. Similarly, in business, companies subscribe to certain norms so that ultimately they can deliver value to their stakeholders, shareholders, so on and so forth.
Yes.
So that is what corporate governance is all about. The way in which we lead this business entity, the way we relate, the relationships are managed within the business entity.
Yes.
And it's based on a number of pillars which we can discuss
this
during
morning.
The program.
Right, thank you very much. Let's hear from Charles Mushene.
Well, thanks very much, Dubal, and good morning, viewers. To me, corporate governance is all about good management of a business. Management in a way that will ensure long-term success and the sustainability of the business. And it hinges on the cornerstone of separation of duties between management and oversight, so that you've got checks and balances along the way.
Mm-hmm. Right. Let's hear from Linus.
Yes, thank you, Debo, and good morning, viewers. I agree with what the two people have said. Corporate governance is also about, first of all, we start with the fact that everybody in an organization must operate in the best interest of that organization, in the best interest of the shareholders of that organization. Now, from that point onwards, we have shared responsibility. We have shared responsibility with the board, with the management, with the employees, in ensuring that we all operate in the best interest. Therefore, it is important to create a governance framework that ensures that whatever we do across the organization is in the best interest of that organization. That is why governance is important, and that's what it's about.
Thank you. Let's hear from Dr. Njenga.
So corporate governance ensures oversight of the strategy and operations of a business. The business itself is constituted as a family, as Catherine says, when its articles of association and its operational team is set into place. Mm-hmm. And they have a goal, and they have to operate within a certain area of service within the community.
Yes.
How that is governed, the operations do the daily work. The corporate governance provides the oversight to ensure that that work is done properly, ethically, and for the good of the company and the stakeholders and the common good in general.
Thank you very much. All right, so we, as you've mentioned, there are principles that we need to predicate also good governance on, and I don't want to preempt all that you have prepared for us to listen to this morning, but I just want to also just bring to your attention that the ground rules that we do have also for maybe the sake of the presentation that you do have. You are aware that, yes, I have my bell here. This is a part of good corporate governance as well, so to speak. Yeah, just to keep time as well, right? I'll give each of you 5 minutes to walk on the podium and talk to us this morning on what good corporate governance is all about. And then also, remember, you have your mic on. We have another mic over there, so I'll just, because you actually tethered to it, so I don't want you to trip over it as you're walking to the podium. So what you'll do, once I call you, you'll just remove it, then you can actually go to the podium over there, and you put your mic just behind the seat, and then your camera is camera 3. So you're going to talk to and teach Kenyans what good, or talk to Kenyans about what good corporate governance is all about. Just for 5 minutes, but you don't have to exhaustively use 5 minutes. You can use 2 or 3, but if you have, of course, a lot to tell us, of course, you have that room to swing your card as well. So that will be it, and of course, I'm going to, midway, when you're giving your talk, I'm going to raise my bell just to tell you that you're midway, and of course, if you go way over the top, I'll ring the bell.
Any penalty?
Any penalty? You won't have breakfast after. You won't have breakfast after the show. Right. So we just want to get right into it, and I think because of the interest of also and convenience, we have Dr. Njenga, who is near to the podium. So we'll begin with you. Remember just to remove your mic so that you can walk over there and talk to us. And in the meantime, I'll give you his profile. Dr. George Njenga is the current and founding Dean of Strathmore Business School. Also is a senior lecturer at Strathmore University in Ethics and Leadership. Also is a founding board member, Association of African Business Schools. Is also the founding board member, International Advisory Board member of Global Business School Network, and member of the board of directors that is Passes Insurance Company. George, Dr. George, you have 5 minutes, beginning now.
Thank you, Debal. Most welcome to our viewers. Good morning. Today we enter into the whole area of corporate governance. I want to correct Debal a little bit. I retired from the Patches Insurance Board. I was a founding board member.
You never
I think I gave him
CV.
a late CV. A late CV in the sense that I haven't lately changed it. But anyway.
Thank you.
Yes, I have been serving in several other boards. Clearly, you understand that corporates or institutions operate within the context of the community and the nation.
Yes.
And those communities deserve certain services for the common good. So whether it is manufacturing, whether it is agriculture and food, whether it is wholesale and retail, tourism, whatever you want. We have companies that operate to serve us and to bring about certain products and services for the good of the people. Those corporates have to work within a framework, and the framework is the Articles and Memorandum of Association. Now, in the case of, forgive me, in the case of parastatals, you will have that government-owned partly or fully, that operates as a company, government institution. Sometimes in the long past, you had people like Uchumi, you had people like Mumias, but occasionally parastatals can also convert into companies. Now parastatals are normally operated through the Act of Parliament. In any case, whether it is a public institution, a private institution, or a semi-private institution like a parastatal, all of them have to operate within certain corporate guidelines. And that is the role of the corporate governance structure of an institution. The board, that should be diverse, that should be representative of the quality of the product and the skill of the product that is being offered of service to the community. There must be a sensitivity to the area in which the company operates or within which constitutional framework it operates. There should be within that board a certain element of order, code of ethics, a certain guideline on how they operate well, a certain political structure in the sense that we know how the chairman works with the CEO, the main operatives of the company, on a day-to-day basis. There should be guidelines that tell us how long the boards should serve. All these together form, in a manner of saying, the oversight to ensure that company makes sure that it operates and operates over a long time institutionally. Very fundamental to that operation now is what we precisely state is the governance of the institution. And in that governance of the institution, the first and fundamental issue is, what is the strategy? What is the path forward for this organization to make it, to serve, and to be there for a long time, and to grow, and to make profit? If there is one thing that is very important, especially for the private sector, is the profitable operation of a company within the framework of an ethical code. Corporate governance is run by the chair and members of the board. Those chair and members of the board must adhere to the ethical code of the board itself and of the company. They must be the light of the society in general, first and foremost, before they sit on a board. But second and most of all, though they represent the shareholders, in fact, they don't only represent the shareholders, they represent the stakeholders. They must prepare a strategy. They must oversee that strategy. They must guide that strategy. And now coming to the third point, when you're governing a corporation, the first thing that you have to have in mind is who are the top leaders of that organization? The CEO, for instance, the company secretary, the HR director, the finance director, all those people who take care of compliance and risk. The top line of the organization is a fundamental responsibility of the board. Their presence, their education, their capacity, their oversight, their coaching, and most of all, when they should be replaced, just like board members should be replaced. So we can say, in effect, today, the corporate governance is no longer a seat of pride for getting sitting allowance and warming the seats in boards, which has been the case in Kenya for a very long time, and rotating family members within the board so that that board may operate within the trustworthy limits of a small group of people. And thirdly, we cannot have board members who are inactive. They must be present for the board meeting. They must be present to think and to provide guidance and to operate within the law and to take fiduciary responsibility of every member of that company, whether it is a person who has paid money, whether it is the employee, whether it is the creditors and debtors. I'm about to finish by stating that if corporate governance is the oversight of the good operation of a company, then it is fundamental that that corporate governance board and board of directors be constituted in such a way that they do not become ineffective. This is to say that the board has to have a majority of independent people who not necessarily make decisions because of the investment they have in that company, but rather for the good of the company. This is a very difficult issue. But in general, you have guidelines, you have the Capital Markets Authority guidelines, you have the Mwongozo Code, you have the Companies Act. All this will guide you in ensuring that you operate within certain limits of good corporate governance. Thank you very much, Deba.
Thank you. I really appreciate. So how are you constituting your board of governance, and how effective are they? And of course, you've mentioned the Mwongozo Code and the Capital Markets Governance Code as well. If you're not privy to that, of course, you can also download the codes from the net as well. And I sought also to get maybe a regulator to be on the part of the panel, but we couldn't, from the Capital Markets Authority, to tell us about their cause as well and how that is being implemented. We know about Mongozo Code, but how effective and how is it implemented within the state corporation? That is a different kettle of fish altogether. Thank you very much, George. We do appreciate that. And of course, we've taken silent points. We shall be discussing them much, much later in the course of the program as well. Right, up next on the podium is Linus Gitahi, who is the chairman of AIB Capital, also is the chairman of Tropical Brands Africa Limited. He's the director of DTB Alliance Insurance, also the chairman of Oxygen Marketing Communication, and of course, he was here, my boss, the group chief executive officer of Nation Media Group, which is the largest media firm in East and Central Africa. And of course, we're going to hear from him this morning to tell us what are the hallmarks of good corporate governance. Sir, you've got 5 minutes beginning now. Thank you.
Thank you, Debo. I'm really happy to be back. This is, I remember when we did the studio a couple of years back, and I've actually never stood here because you guys always obviously did a good job. Now, like I said earlier, the corporate governance, first of all, is about everybody operating in a company's best interest. And I think that is cardinal and that's fundamental to everything that we do. That when people come together, and I still take the family analogy, once people come together, we must all ensure that we're pulling in the right direction. Oftentimes we've got very many bright people all over the place, managers, board members, and unless we all come together and have a coherent way of operating, we are likely to pull in different directions, and that is why corporate governance is important. Now, I want to say there are three planks that I would want to talk about in corporate governance. The first one is leadership itself, that we've got to ensure that we have the right leadership. When you talk about corporate governance, when you talk about Nation Media Group or any other organization, the first thing you've got to do is ensure that you have the right leadership. That leadership is not just in the board, but in the management as well. Now, and then you create the governance framework that ensures that everybody makes sure everybody is accountable to each other and everybody therefore is accountable to the organization. What I want to talk about a little more, just taking from what George was talking about, is oftentimes why corporate governance sometimes fails. Sometimes, because we all agree that we need good corporate governance, we all agree that we need to put the structures. Why then do we have these situations where corporate governance sometimes, or organizations don't seem to be operating properly in terms of corporate governance? I think for me, one of the biggest reasons is the whole question of consequences. If you look at organization, you create a board, you have a management, but what happens when things don't go the right way? What happens, for instance, let's say when there's a fraud? And the difference, and maybe that is the difference between the private sector and the public sector, because in the private sector, when you have those shortcomings, corporate governance ensures that there is prompt consequences, that the issue is dealt with in a prompt way. Otherwise, there's no point of having corporate governance. And that is why, oftentimes, there has been lots of conversations about maybe we need to get a lot of our people from the private sector to the public sector. Maybe they're going to do a better job if you put them in the public sector, where we think things have not been done as well as they should. But you know what? We have got very many examples of you move people from private sector to the public sector, and they actually don't do well. Why? Because when in a sense, we have all seen that I don't think the private sector people are any better than the public sector people. The difference is that in the private sector, we've got very strict governance. And therefore, when you just move people from private sector to public sector, where maybe the governance may not be as strong, what we find is that these people fail. These people actually, we start wondering, what has happened? And this is a person who was delivering very strongly in the private sector. So the important thing is not even about individuals. It is ensuring that the consequences about misgovernance are timely and are very and the consequences are very very strict. So that is what That is what is important about corporate governance. The other thing I would want to talk about is we talk about shareholders. Ultimately, when you're dealing with an organization, the ultimate person you're accountable to is a shareholder. Now, we all know that shareholders meet once a year. And then you've got a board. And boards meet probably once every 3 months. It's true, they need to check everything that needs to be checked. But then, the area that we oftentimes do not talk about when we're having this conversation is management itself. Because management has the day-to-day responsibility of ensuring that corporate governance is conducted in the right way. Because every day you got the finance director, you got the CEO, you got the HR, you got production or technical people. Those people must always come together and ensure that day in, day out, they are doing the right things. So that when you talk about a board, when you talk about the shareholders, they are only just basically coming to check that what we said ought to be done is done. Having said that, it is very, very important that even with the board, that we actually ensure whether you're dealing with family companies, whether you're dealing with public companies, that we actually create a system of accountability. And that, in Kenya, probably is an area that we have not spent a lot of time on. And that is why, if you look at the supermarkets, you can have an organization that is actually taking a lot of resources from different companies, and then you hear maybe it is collapsing. And when you look at why it is collapsing, you find that usually, oftentimes, it's a governance issue. So beyond even the public companies, beyond even the publicly listed companies, I think it is high time we had a conversation about governance in any organization that intends to deal with the public. Because those resources that I entrust you with as somebody running another organization, you have to be accountable, and we have to create systems of accountability that ensures that we look after those resources. Asante sana.
Thank you, thank you. Thank you, Linus Gitahi there. And of course, picking up some of the salient points from there as well, that he states that he asked the probing question, do you have the right leadership governance framework, first of all? And why do corporate governance sometimes fail, right? He talks of consequence. How prompt are you to be quick off the mark when we have a scandal or fraud within a company? How do you respond? The shifting from public to, maybe from the private to the public sector, how of a difference do we normally experience? Is there any discernible difference when we have corporate leaders moving from the private sector going to the public sector? Could it be maybe the governance structure within the public sector which is diametrically different from the corporate sector as well? And consequences about mismanagement, how prompt are you is what he's actually putting forward for you. And a system of accountability, how accountable are we? Maybe that is something that we need to shake into place as well as we're moving forward in this country. The system of accountability. Thank you very much. Up next, we have Charles Mushene, who will walk to the podium to also give us his thoughts this morning on what good corporate governance is all about. As I try and also reset my stopwatch here, he is a board-level advisor, corporate governance, ethics, and strategy. Also the chair, East African Breweries Limited and Barclays Kenya Limited. He is also the member of Institute of Directors Kenya, the Institute of Certified Public Secretaries of Kenya, is a fellow of the Institute of Certified Public Accountants of Kenya as well. And he enjoys reading occasionally, golfing or occasional golf, travel, and mentoring young professionals. Right, Charles, you have 5 minutes beginning now. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks very much, Tubal, and good morning again, viewers. I'm delighted to be here to talk about corporate governance because corporate governance is something that is close to my heart. I've been working in that arena for a number of years, and I've seen progress over the years, and I've also seen spectacular failures in corporate governance in our environment and across the world. Just to highlight something that Linus has just said, that corporate governance applies to all businesses. There is this misconception that corporate governance applies only to listed entities, sort of the really big businesses. But this is how you run a business in the right way. So it has to apply to every business. And to me, when I think about effective corporate governance, a number of things come to mind. One, corporate governance is about separation of duties between those who are charged with management of the business and those who are charged with oversight. The interaction between those two creates what is called corporate governance. And for that to be effective, you have got to have both parties, one appreciating each other's role and respecting it. And it's only through constructive tension between those two entities where the parties are able to have frank conversations and to challenge each other in an environment of mutual respect that you get effective corporate governance. When you think about a board of directors, it probably meets between 4 and 6 times in a year in a typical business. And those meetings take probably 5 or so hours. So you're talking about only 30 hours in a year when the board meets. So one of the things that I think is really important is for the board to appreciate its role and to allocate that time that it has got to the areas where it will have the biggest impact. So it is very important to determine where to put in the time. And when I look at the role of the board, I see 3 broad areas of focus and attention. One, there's the area around the structure, the systems, the processes, and the procedures in the organization that help management run the business effectively and to make sure that everything is under control and that the interests of all parties are safeguarded. Now that's one broad area of focus for the board. Another area of focus for the board, in my view, is around establishing the right corporate culture. And this is all to do with people because culture is about people. It's about putting forth the right values, rolling those ones out, inculcating them into the employees and everybody in the business, making sure that this helps them determine what's right and what's not right so that their behaviors are guided by what is right. And the right behavior applied consistently constitutes what's a corporate culture. And for a business to be sustainable and to be successful, you've got to have ethical business practices which are based on an ethical corporate culture. And this cannot be started from the bottom. The board has got to provide the leadership that is required in that area. They've got to be the role models, set the right tone at the top. And ethical business practices and this kind of culture is not something that can be imposed from outside. It's got to come from within the organization, from deep within the belly of the organization and permeate through the entire system and then radiate out into the market. The third area of focus for the board, in my view, is applying the long-term lens to the business. And to me, this is really critical, and it's probably the area where boards should be spending most of the time. It's okay to spend less time on the business as usual items, whether it's the preparation of financial statements and the running of the business, because there are systems and processes and controls in place. And if one makes sure that those ones are working properly and effectively, then one can rely on those. But when you're looking out into the future, and remember, the role of the board is to make sure that this business is here 30, 50 years from now. And it's our role as stewards of the business to make sure that we place that business in good stead such that it will be successful and thriving into the future. And so looking at what's coming into the business, what are the changes that are happening in the environment, what are the changes that are likely to impact on the business, what opportunities are there, and what are the risks in that environment. That's really important for the board. So strategy, really important. We are in an environment where we are seeing more rapid change in the environment than we have ever seen before, thanks to the changes in technology, technology-enabled, the demographics, the needs and the demands of the newer generation and so on. So we've got to understand what that means for the business in future. So looking at strategy and the risks that come with those changes, that is something that is really important. Succession planning. We don't want to have a situation whereby a CEO leaves or retires, for example. We've known for a year that this CEO is going to retire but have done nothing. We should have a pipeline to make sure that this succession planning is well managed. And ongoing stakeholder management, really important. All the stakeholders, be they customers, suppliers, and the community in which we operate. So in conclusion, good and effective corporate governance is all about sustainable long-term success of the business, and that this has to come from within the organization. It's not going to be brought from outside by codes, rules, regulations, and laws. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Charles Mushene there. And of course, we are looking at corporate governance. Before we took a short break, I promised to circle back with Catherine Musakali, who is going to give us also an insight about good corporate governance. And she's an advocate of the High Court of Kenya. Also, she's a founder of Dorian Associates. She's a founder also and chair of Women on Boards Network. Also, she's a corporate governance trainer. She is, I should say, also Chief Judge Corporate Governance, that is the FIRE Awards, and ISPAC Fellow. And of course, she has a long list of achievements as well on a profile that I cannot enumerate all of them right now. But we're going to hear from Catherine this morning. Catherine, you have 5 minutes beginning now to tell us also your side on what good corporate governance is all about.
Thank you, Dibal, and good morning, viewers. I would just like to pick up from where Chairman Mushene left the conversation. And just to say that good corporate governance is premised on hearts and minds. So I apply certain principles of corporate governance, not because there is a law that requires me to apply those principles, but because I believe that it is the right thing to do. So ethical leadership is a key pillar of good corporate governance. And so the board is very important in driving this ethical culture, in ensuring that the organization is run in a manner that will deliver value to the organization. And that's why a key pillar of corporate governance is ethical leadership. And sometimes you go to organizations and you find that the organization has a code of corporate governance or a code of ethics, but the board does not subscribe to it. It is a bit like a parent telling the children, go to church on Sunday, but you will find me here. So the board also has to subscribe to that ethical culture, has to push that ethical culture, has to make sure that that ethical culture has permeated the whole organization. A second key pillar in corporate governance is the issue of sustainability. And when we talk about sustainability in corporate governance, we are talking about sustainability from a triple bottom line approach. That is people, planet, and profit. So how is this organization going to deliver value to the stakeholders in the future from a people perspective? Which people do we have to drive this organization forward into the future? How much do we have to make sure that this organization is going to be there in the future? What about the planet? How are we looking after the planet to make sure that it is actually a good corporate citizen? Another key pillar in corporate governance is accountability, risk management, and internal controls. A number of corporate failures have actually been as a result of lack of good internal controls. So the board is doing all it can, the management is doing all they can to generate revenue, but that revenue is leaking because we don't have good internal controls. So the board must focus on accountability, must be accountable to stakeholders, must ensure that there are effective internal controls in place. Another key pillar in good corporate governance is diversity. Diversity looked at from the whole perspective of diversity. i.e. having different people on the board who bring different perspectives to the board. And here I'm not just talking about gender diversity, but diversity from the whole, in the broadest sense of the word. So do we have experience on the board? Do we have inexperience on the board? Do we have innovative people who are risk averse as well? Do we have women on the board? Do we have men on the board? Because all these different groups of people bring totally different perspectives and deliver effective decision making. Another key pillar in good corporate governance is, of course, transparency and disclosure. So it is all good to do all the good things in good corporate governance. But at the end of the day, stakeholders are starting to demand for greater accountability, greater transparency, greater disclosure from boards of directors. And when you look at the codes of corporate governance that we have whole chapters on transparency and disclosure requiring, and the latest in the Companies Act 2015 is that we're now going to know how much I earn from my board role at a certain organization. So disclosing my remuneration and how is that remuneration then linked to the performance of the organization. The whole discussion around integrated reporting. Stakeholders do value balanced reporting. So integrated reporting is about ensuring that in your annual report, you are actually not just covering the financials, but also giving the background information against which those financial results have been delivered. So what is your approach to risk management? What is your approach to how do you deal with your stakeholders? How do you engage in CSR, so on and so forth? Another key pillar in corporate governance is succession planning. And Chairman Mushene talked about succession planning from a management perspective. I want to say that good corporate governance also requires the board to ensure that they have a succession plan in place for themselves. I.e., when I leave this board position, who is there to take over from me? What skills are required on this board to make sure that this organization is sustainable in the future? This calls on boards to ensure that they have developed a skills matrix that is aligned to their strategy, and therefore it is very easy for them to then develop a succession plan out of for the board. The other important development in the area of corporate governance is the whole issue of term limits. In Kenya, we are talking about term limits for board members. It's not a very common discussion elsewhere in the world, because sometimes when people get to the helm of an organization, they want to be there forever. But from a corporate governance perspective, it is always good to get experience from one organization and then transfer that experience to another organization and allow new and innovative ideas to come on board in the organization that you're living. So the whole issue of term limits, how long should I stay in this organization? And the CMA code has set limits on that. Mwongozo has also set limits on that. Now, I also want to talk about continuous development of board members. Very often we get to boards and we assume that we need to develop our employees, but we actually forget that we ourselves need development because the world is changing. So a key pillar in corporate governance is ensuring that as board members, we are continuously developing ourselves, that we are continuously learning from new trends and implementing those trends within the organization that we find ourselves in. Lastly, I want to just say that good corporate governance is actually from deep down. We implement good corporate governance rules because we believe they're the right things that we need to implement. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And of course, Catherine has raised salient points here that we need to take cognizance of and heart and mind That is very key as well. Ethical leadership, this also has rung out from across, our panelists this morning, the issue of sustainability, also integrated reporting. What is it all about? And of course, we shall be uncoupling this for you to get to understand what this is all about. This is where now we get to actually talk about this. Remember, you can drive a show with me as well. You can now chime in. Hit us on Twitter. AM Live NTV is a Twitter handle. AM Live NTV is a profile name on Facebook, and 20505 our SMS portal. Also, our numbers will be up for you to call in, ask questions, or share your contributions as well. And so we will begin with what George told us this morning about articles of association and roles of corporate governance structure. How pivotal is that? We need to have a proper structure for us to also have a good base for good governance. And it's not a seat of pride, right? So yes. It's not a seat of pride, George?
Yes, it isn't. Very frequently you ask yourself if you can run a country without a constitution.
Yes.
Without a constitutional framework. What has happened suddenly right from the bottom, the small, medium enterprise, or even the micro one that works in the so-called Juakali, these are our future industries, by the way. That's where we will breed the best industrialists, if we train them. We imagine a company can operate just from the whim of the board. No. A company operates from the whim of the government of the people, by the people, for the people. It is the institutionalization of the common good in the Constitution that allows companies, wherever they are, to come up and serve that common good. Mm-hmm. Like I said, whether it is in water, food, natural resources, even women and children, education, industrialization. You have all these areas that we want to ensure are running properly, and that is a prerogative of government. Now, how does government provide employment these days? If you want government to employ people, the first thing it has to do is to provide enabling government, an enabling environment for these companies to operate. One company is able to generate directly and indirectly 400,000 employees. Look at companies like Safaricom. Look at Equity Bank. Look at all the other banks that are operating, Kenya Commercial Bank. How many people do these people employ? It's a hell of a lot of people. We can't expect that people are employed by government. No, it's the private sector that will operate. And we have to have this change and paradigm within those who make the constitutions that allow the companies to operate. Give the environment. I know we say that we have to start from the stomach of the company, but no. The first person who gives a culture to a company is the one who allows it to operate.
But
this is fundamental.
What about countries which operate without a constitution? England, for instance, Magna Carta.
It is a misconception.
Misconception.
All right.
Yes.
What they said is that a constitution must be written. There are states like Britain, all right, which have written it, but have not written it as a continuous document called the Constitution, all right? It is the customs of the people that have grown into a constitution. Now, what happens is that if the people in a company do not grow understanding why this company was really created, there is an issue. And that is what is stated in what we call the Memorandum and Articles of Association. That thing has to be rechecked because nowadays it is a generic document that has no meaning. And everything is included there. Now, I'm not saying that we should change the content, but we should highlight within that articles. Nowadays, the corporate governance starts there. You have to state clearly how the board will run from that particular articles of association. And these are the things the general society must look at before allowing people to put money into a project. Okay? Sorry, this is a very preamble to the corporate governance. But it is so fundamental.
Yes.
And it is being overlooked. The Constitution, look, if you go into marriage without the marital act,
you need a constitution.
You need a constitution.
Yeah.
You should treat wife, brother, sister like that. Now, companies normally operate suddenly with an unwritten constitution when they have one. That is the whim of the board. No.
Right. Let's see from Linus, because you talk about, and you asked, why do corporate governance sometimes fail?
Yeah.
Could it be also a perception that you are talking about people who understand the genesis of a company, the creation of a company, when maybe through the transitioning successions planning over the years is when maybe we lose the vision and people don't really have the heart and mind, as you speak, of a particular company. Could it be also the consequences of this particular failing? I don't know.
Yeah, I think first of all, you're right. The companies have their traditions, and many of them would have evolved over time. But oftentimes, when companies fail or corporate governance fails, in my mind, is a function of two things. First of all, it starts with management failure as well.
Yes.
So the management itself, and you have to remember that when you're talking about senior management, particularly the CEO, the HR directors, the finance directors, these are the people running the company on a day-to-day basis. And we must ensure that the way they are operating is above board, the way they are operating is really the way the company intended them to operate. It must be, and that is why it is important that that most good organizations will have a proper HR manual about how we conduct ourselves. They will have a proper strategy in terms of how we do our business. One of the things actually that I find when you're talking about corporate governance that in a sense lacks, and then boards will come in and deal with issues, is this whole area of HR. My view is that the HR area is an area that actually corporates do not pay as much attention to as they ought to do. Mm-hmm. Why am I saying that? When you're talking about running a company, when you're talking about governance, you're actually talking about people. Mm-hmm. You're not talking about machines. You're not talking about those technical. You're not talking about even the technology that is evolving very fast. You are talking about how people relate.
Yes.
You're talking about how this department relates with this department. You are talking about the systems that you have created in that organization. You are talking about authority limits. You're talking about the general behavior. You're talking about culture. Yet, when you look at many organizations, the HR department is usually a poor cousin of many of the other departments. The traditional organization has finance, and with all due respect to the finance people around the country, you have finance at as your right-hand person. Yet you're talking about people. Even when the boards meet and you're talking about the conduct of the company, you're talking about people. But oftentimes, even within boards, the extent to which HR is represented in boards, and I would challenge us to do research on that,
yes,
is actually very low. And yet you're talking about how, you're talking about people. So one of the things that I would say is that if we really have to have proper corporate governance in terms of our day-to-day relationship, we really need to empower the whole area of HR. We need to ensure adequate representation of HR in the board, and even in day-to-day management, HR ought to be, in my mind, the right-hand person of the leadership.
Mm-hmm. And maybe also, thank you, Linus, we can actually try and dovetail this with the corporate culture that you're talking about and the ethical leadership. Because when we're talking about human resource, we're talking about people, and people have culture as well. But most of the times, yes, we have culture or a corporate culture that is not maybe effectively communicated to the employees. Right? We maybe have the induction, but all that will remain are just like, flowers on the wall. Yeah, we know we have to be effective in this area or that. But how is the management also making sure that people embrace the corporate culture of that organization? How do you catch that particular drift, so to speak?
Okay, thanks, Dubal. The whole issue of culture and ethics, I think it's a big topic. And when you're talking about the business, you cannot look at that in isolation.
Yes.
Because the business is part of an ecosystem. You cannot talk about corporate governance without talking about political governance, mm-hmm, because that's what affects the environment in which we operate. And the societal governance, the value systems in the community. And we're in a situation whereby we've seen our value systems eroded over time. Society seems to continuously be losing touch with what is right and what is not. So when it comes to addressing the whole issue of culture and values, I think it's got to be a holistic approach. Otherwise, we'll find the environment will be putting brakes on whatever the corporate sector is doing. Mm-hmm. So we've got to start inculcating the right values in the youngsters right from home. At the dinner tables, mm-hmm, and in schools. We've got to uphold and be good role models. And it's against that light that we can then go back to our boards and say, this is what we should be doing as a business. These are the systems and processes that we should have to support the right culture. These are the reward systems. These are the consequence management processes, and you make sure that we encourage the right approach. And the board has got the ability under any constitution to bring in whatever skills and competencies it needs to support it in that role. And to Linus's point about HR, if you don't have if this is really important, and in many cases it is, and you don't have HR expertise in management feeding into the board in the right way, the board is at liberty to go out and seek advice elsewhere. Yeah.
But what we see mostly, maybe in many organizations also, is that the HR has just become a lapdog, maybe, of the management, so to speak. Yeah. So they don't have, they're not really given that room to swing their cat, so to speak, right? They cannot effectively, unless, because it is like a support role to the company. How do we then effectively try and inculcate a proper HR?
I think as far as that one is concerned, it's vital for the board to put this on its agenda. I talked about strategy earlier on, and what kind of business are we going to have in future? What are the needs of those businesses? What are we doing to make sure that we are ready for that future, and that we just don't wither away? If the board does not take a key role in this area, then it will just take a back seat. So the board needs to come forward. You need to give this role prominence, as Linus said, and the individuals have got to feel empowered. Thank you. And they've got to come to the board. Many boards, certainly of big businesses, have got a reward system and a committee that deals with the reward and recruitment of staff. You've got to make sure that we give the prominence to this role, and that this person is empowered and has got the right infrastructure.
Right, thank you. And I want to come to you, Catherine, because you mentioned the issue of integrated reporting. And most of the companies right now, they're trying to embrace, which is a new phenomenon of integrated reporting as well. Most of them, they focus on the corporate social responsibility. But now, as we understand with the integrated reporting, it is over and above just CSR, that the company has to be a good corporate citizen as well. Maybe you need to just enlighten us on this. What is the integrated reporting, first of all?
All right. Let me just start by saying for state-owned entities, state corporations, Mwongozo requires them to adopt integrated reporting. For listed companies, the Code of Corporate Governance also requires them to move towards integrated reporting. So what is integrated reporting? Initially, when we used to prepare financial reports, we would have just maybe 3 statements. Yes. Income statement, balance sheet, and I don't know what, well, I'm not an accountant, but something along those lines. 3 statements. For me as a lawyer, I would find it very, very difficult to read those statements. What integrated reporting says is, alongside the financial results, we need to actually understand the background information against which those results have been delivered. So what is included? Management discussion, and management discussion is a financial term. What is management's view about the environment in which they have delivered these results? That's one. 2, the sustainability report. And if you look at KCB, Barclays, if you look at Safaricom, they have actually started preparing sustainability reports. So that sustainability report is actually part of the annual report, so to speak. So what else goes into it? How do you approach relationships with your stakeholders? Yes. How do you manage risk? How do you engage with employees and other stakeholders? How do you approach CSR? What is your risk appetite? So on and so forth. So as the term suggests, it is integrated in the sense that it brings all the relevant information in one report that I, as an investor or an interested party, if I'm to interrogate a report from X company, I am able to understand, well, actually, they made X return this year because they had these other things going. So integrated, bringing all that information in one piece, in one report, that gives me a holistic view of how this company is operating going forward.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And George, the issue of rotating family members within the board, I think you've mentioned that, because we need to also bring this discussion home to some of the examples that we do have, and the country also is suffering because of, in light of this, people don't want to lose their own turf, right? They feel like, yes, we've worked so hard over the years to actually put up this company. It should, like, the baton should go to my son and my son's, daughter, and that way. And then within time, we see also that particular sort of good governance slipping away from them. So we have case in point of what is happening with the supermarkets that also we had Linus mentioning here as well. Could we just bring it home? Where do we put the context of family and boards?
The day before yesterday, I had an incredible news from one of our researchers that 66% of the global GDP is produced by family companies. For instance, Walmart is a family company. But the Bright families, what they have done is they have delinked the family politics from the management of the business. A board is actually a very technical and professional body. Although we say it's oversight and it's meant to give advice like a good father or mother to the children. No, it's part and parcel of the game. And nowadays, anything done wrong by the top executives will be charged to each member of the board. So, coming back to your question, I see very good family companies managed by eliminating the political structure of the family. That is, for instance, the brothers, the sisters, the mother, the father, the second wife, the third wife, operating the company on the dinner table, and then overlooking all the decisions made by the executives. So how do you do that? Very frequently what you do is you start a trust for the company. A trust is a sort of NGO foundation where the profits that run from the company that are due to the family members, if they are 100%, all of it, or if they are portion, that portion due to the family, it goes to the trust. And there they discuss as a family member where to invest the money. The trust appoints a board, but the board must be exactly the way Catherine has put it and this Charles and Linus have put. It has to be people who are going to run that company so well that it will grow. It will expand. Now, I want to tie something small to those family members, just in case there are tensions, because life is incredible. Well, in the board, there are those things we call committees, because the board cannot be discussing 101 issues at the same time. And in any case, you can't be a guru of everything. So the board has what we call committees. There can be a committee of HR and governance, and that can take a significant portion of the agenda of the board. There has to be the audit and risk committee. Okay, the audit and risk committee, its role is to ensure that cash is guarded and the assets of the company are guarded and the risks are mitigated. There is the whole area of marketing, operations, intellectual work of the company. Now, the family members can come into those committees and support their ideas within those committees. It doesn't matter that my brother, my sister, my uncle is sitting in this committee. According to their capability, they can sit in those committees. But what they cannot do is to run the board in the kitchen or in the dining room or in the bedroom. No, let that be the work of those people entrusted with the care because of their capability. I've also seen a very beautiful thing about diversity said here. And I don't know whether you all captured it. It was said, does the board also show inexperience within its members? So for instance, how does a family generate capacity for the future from their own, like a child? How do you bring in a child into the business? First, by setting him into the business right at the bottom, let them sweat it out like all the others, but occasionally to put them in the board with their inexperience. The amazing thing is that inexperience can be a source of great value. All right. Now, when I see even big companies here that know 75% of the population is below 35 or whatever big number you want to put there, people between 2018, 19, 20, 21, up to 35 are still not sought out. Why? Because the first discussion is you must be heavily experienced for you to enter this board. Heavily experienced means you're 60, 70, so that you can retire quickly. Now, what about all this data science? What about this mobile? What about this social? Who has the sensitivity to this thing? The young people. Who sees what they will want in 50? The young people. If they are not there, whether a girl or a boy, then how will they run the company? So families have to be astute. Remove the family politics from the business.
Thank you.
Set it in its right place.
Right. Let's hear from Linus. Linus, first of all, you mentioned the public-private transition.
Yeah.
Right? The many leaders, we presume that from the private, they're really up to scratch when it comes to good corporate governance as well. But when they go to the public sector, it is a different kettle of fish altogether. Right. We can actually talk about the cabinet, and right now also the president is, of course, everyone is eagerly waiting to see the other half that will be also selected or appointed to the cabinet as well. The question is, we talked of technocrats that we thought from the private sector they will deliver, but most of them, they say a quarter or three-quarters of this cabinet has not truly delivered. So what could be the problem? Because they had the wherewithal, they had the good training, they had the good qualifications, but when it came to deliver, that was another different case altogether.
Okay, the point I was making, and we can go back to that, is that when you talk about corporate governance, when you talk about people from the private sector, why do people from the private sector succeed? Why is it that when you now talk about all the companies that people are mentioning here, you actually look at them as companies that are well managed, and oftentimes you say we maybe want to pluck those leaders and maybe put them in the public sector. The point I was making is the reason many people succeed. The average human being will fall into temptation, and that's the reality. Will do different things, but people need to be managed. Leaders need to be managed, and the best way I know of managing leaders, particularly in the corporate sector, is actually creating good corporate governance. When you have problems in the corporate sector, if let's say a leader does the wrong things, let's even talk about fraud in the corporate sector. This is dealt with in the private sector very, very promptly, and you hear, such and such a leader is no longer there because there are these problems, and you're almost talking about it in the past because decisions were taken. Now you plug this person and put him in the public sector, where some of the cases about misdeeds in the public sector go 20, 30 years. So you already have that environment that actually here there are no consequences, and that's the point I was making. When you create an environment where there are no consequences, or when you feel you can get away with it, people get tempted. And that is why, for me, the bigger thing is not moving private sector people to public sector positions. That, while that can happen, there's no issue about that. The bigger thing is creating the environment of good corporate governance that ensures that people thrive within that environment. For me, that is the issue. The fact that you can, if you do something wrong, there are consequences, and those consequences are speedy, are timely, and they are of such magnitude that they act as deterrents, and that is the gap we have in the private sector.
Public sector.
Sorry, in the public sector, yes. That's the gap. That's the gap we have in the public sector. That people are actually walking there, knowing that even if I do this or this or this, chances of getting away with it are high. People get tempted, and people end up doing, bad things. The same people who are very well behaved in the private sector. So what should we be doing? Is it about moving people, or is it about creating systems? The point I was making is we need to create systems. We need to ensure that our systems in both private and public sector, especially the public sector, can stand up to scrutiny. And that is the biggest thing. We must ensure that our systems, our structures can stand up to scrutiny. And that is the biggest investment we can do in this country. Whether you're talking about the judiciary, whether you're talking about public operations, whether you're talking about the cabinet, whether you're talking about ministries, it is ensuring that the systems that operate in there can stand scrutiny and they are of the highest standard. Then it won't matter. Because who are the guys who work in the public sector? They are our brothers and sisters. And we know back at home, they are not any different from us. But the environment in which they work is the one that is different, is the one that leads into those misdeeds. Right. And that is where we need to focus on, in my view.
So let's hear also, you pick your brains, Charles, because there's the element of system, good structure and system. Once they go there, they find a mammoth, maybe of cartels. And, there's only one person fighting against a big cartel. The system is so gamed that, everyone wants to actually, proffer their clammy fingers to, steal from the public coffers as well. But you've talked about separation of duties and also long-term lens to the business, the long-term strategy. Is it that most of the times we don't have leaders who, they have a long-range view of a company once they set in, right? Because we always believe when we go to the CEO's office, we'll find, wow, it is a big office, no books, no files. It's only the mahogany desk there and the high seat with only maybe a laptop, nothing else. And we ask the question, why? Then they always tell us, because we want him to think. He needs to pace around the office thinking, having the long-range view of a company. So when we see most of the companies not really folding, is it because we don't have people who have an extended view of how they want to take the company to the long-term future?
Traditionally, boards have focused very much on financial performance and the results that go out into the market.
The now.
The here and now,
yes.
As opposed to the future. But that's now changing. And as I said earlier, the rapid change that we are seeing in this environment, all the volatility and the uncertainty in the marketplace requires us to be agile. So you've got to be able to anticipate that. So increasingly, boards are spending much more time looking forward, thinking about what could be coming at the business around the corner that we cannot see, as opposed to spending a lot of time looking at the rear view mirror. Which then begs the question, is the board as currently constituted able to deal with those challenges? And in many cases, you'll find that that is not the case. Yes. Particularly when you're talking about changes to do with demographic changes, things to do with technology. When you start talking about blockchain technology, when you start talking about data analytics and robotics and so on, many of us would get lost. So how can you carry out your role effectively to challenge what is being presented to you by management as a strategy if you have got no clue what they're talking about? Then you become a board that will just rubber stamp what management is talking about, as opposed to one that is challenging all this. So the constitution of the board for the future becomes really critical. And the kind of skill sets that we require in future are going to be different from the skill sets that we've got now. The business models that we've got now might not be appropriate to take the businesses into the future. And hence the need for a paradigm shift to see how do we bring in these skills and competencies onto the board? Do we bring them onto the board, or do we create structures which give the board access to the youngsters and the techies and other people who are able to understand what is being presented to us and digest it to us and break it down to us in a language that we can understand, so that then at least we can ask the right questions. So that is one of the challenges of that the boards have got. And just if I could just make a comment about what was said earlier about the failures. Yes. I don't think that most of the failures that we've seen as a result of things going really wrong in the day-to-day operations and the controls. I think what we've seen is a case where board members forget the cardinal duties of a board member. And there are two. The duty of loyalty, which is you spend all your time for the best interest of the business above self and any other interests. And two, the duty of care, to exercise due care. So the causes of those failures are around ineptitude in some cases where board members have no clue what's going on.
Yes.
Which then raises the question about how do you bring them up to speed? Are we selecting the right people to bring onto the boards? And two, sometimes they're complicit because they have self-interest in the outcomes on some of the decisions. So they use their positions to override or find themselves in a conflict of interest situation, which is all about the ethical behaviors and the value systems of those individuals. So those are areas that we need to address. I talked about corporate culture. I think it's really important.
Yes.
We talked about having the right skills and the right competencies on the board. And I think that, together with the changes that are coming at us, requires to relook at the way we constitute our boards.
Right, thank you. Catherine, you mentioned salary. And of course, I think also with the corporate governance code from the Capital Markets Authority, this is also required from listed companies. We've seen from news that, yes, companies that maybe will not really perform also, the CEO might be penalized. I don't know, I can get clarity from that. You talked about transparency and disclosure. Maybe you can actually make it very limpid for us this morning as well.
All right, so in terms of the Code of Corporate Governance for listed companies, the requirement, and the Companies Act 2015 as well, effective last year, is that going forward, companies are going to be required to disclose the remuneration of board members by name. By name. So initially what used to happen is that you'd have a line in the financials that says board remuneration or board expenses, and it's just a lump sum figure.
Yes.
But what the Companies Act 2015 says now is that going forward, every individual will be identified by name, and it will be said, Catherine Musakali, for 2016, this was your remuneration. Yeah? So what that gives the stakeholders, of course there are pros and cons for that level of disclosure, but what that, the intention really is for stakeholders to look at the remuneration and to say, if we are remunerating this level to this individual, what is the value they are delivering to the company? So is it commensurate? The board remuneration, is it commensurate with the performance of the company? Secondly, there used to be, particularly in some companies, and I won't mention them, that there are some of us who are perpetually there in the organization so that we can earn sitting allowance. Yeah? So if you start disclosing by name, then it will be very easy for you to know who is perpetually coming there to earn remuneration. But let me just pick up something else that Dr. Njenga referred to, which is the whole concept of the Articles of Association.
Yes.
It is so critical that board members understand not just the law around corporate governance, and particularly the Companies Act 2015, but also the Articles of Association. Because one of the things that the law now says is that board members will be found guilty if they have not acted within powers. That statement calls on us to actually understand the law as well as the Articles of Association.
Right. Finally, let's hear from Dr. Njenga. When we are talking about establishing the right corporate culture, what are some of the cognizant factors that we need to actually be aware of, especially in light of change management? Because this is a whole shift on that arena when it comes to corporate culture.
So my feeling is that first you have to have what is written in the law and foreseen as good governance. the board members have to follow certain characteristics. For instance, if you're in a public company and another public company board and another public company board, the CMA corporate governance guidelines are telling you, why don't you restrict yourself as chairman of a board to only 2 in the public sphere, all right? So, and when you are in many boards as a member, you're being told, when you have more than 5, you're probably not effective in those boards. Why don't you reduce them and concentrate on the board that you're working on? Now, that concentration means you really study what is the code of ethics, what is the strategy, and so on and so forth. This is very fundamental. The second thing is there has to be a guideline for the board and a code of ethics. The first people to ensure the code of ethics is lived exemplarily are the board members. As you know, people see and then they do, more than read and do. The code can be there. But if the board members themselves are not being seen as adherent, as people who love the code of ethics, inside the company and outside. Now, what is the issue with this inside the company? How do you solve the problem of inside the company? Very, very simple. The board must put its nose inside the company. It must be seen to love the executives, but fingers out. So where you see the board members are actually suppliers to the company or have hidden interests in the company, third-party reporting is required in our financial statements. But the people see, and they know if this board of directors, the same routine he's using to curve around the laws to get money into his or her pocket, is the same thing the employees do. They're the ones who are doing it anyway for him or her. So the first thing you have to do is that inside the board, there must be people who are of very high integrity. It's just like a father telling the children again, please don't do this. And then the children look at the face of the father and know, but you're doing it, sir, so why? In fact, it's normally the argument. You tell your child, do this, and then the child looks at you and says, but you are not doing it. Exemplariness is very good. And by the way, it's exactly the same in the public sector. In the public sector, and I will finalize with the SME after the public sector. In the public sector, this question that Bwana Linus has brought up, consequences. You find a person is a minister or a cabinet secretary or a PS or a politically appointed person in a parastatal board. What is their job there? To suck money. I'm not saying they're sucking money. What I am trying to say is that they have interest in the private sector. The 1971 law in Kenya, session paper, I don't remember what, where our former Ndegwa governor said, no, you're in the government, you can also go and operate in the private sector. So you are judge and player at the same time. You are playing the soccer game in the field, but you are also the referee. It's not possible. That's what accountability and declaring your assets was meant to do for our government private sector. First of all, delink yourself from all your companies so that you can be judged. They are not doing it. The last thing is the SME sector. SME sector and micro industries. All those companies have to have people who provide guidance, but they don't pay them because they don't have too much money to do that, okay? But they can provide a token of appreciation, like petrol, 2,000 bob. But we have to come in and help SMEs. Now, you see, there's a problem with SMEs. The SMEs is that the father and the mother, because basically they are family companies or friends companies, they take the money, cash, home, to buy the light, to buy the petrol, to feed the children. They don't know whether they are taking profit or they are incurring a cost in the company that will cause that company to come down. So the difference between cash for the business and cash for the family becomes vague. And this is where you need a little cupboard of 2 or 3 people, friends, who come in and advise you at the SME level. Hey, stop doing that.
Thank you. Let's hear from our Linus as we're winding up as well. The issue of term limit was raised here, especially in the board members. And recently also we had the Kenya Institute of Management coming up with a report on the diversity and inclusivity report, where we can see from the board level, we're not really embracing even the millennials, right? The average age maybe is from 51 going to 60, as you mentioned. So if we are actually to pass, and you mentioned families, we need to put our young children maybe in different facets of the company, so as they come up also they have the holistic view of how the company is operating. The term limit, many people tend to hang by the fingernails, even beyond 70 as stipulated maybe in the Constitution. We redeploy to other boards. Maybe you can briefly mention about this.
Yeah, first of all, I think I quite liked what Dr. Jaga said, nose in, fingers out. I think that's a very good expression. Nose in, fingers out, as a way of the way board members and everybody should relate, because that is really what ensures that whatever we do has high integrity. Actually, somebody else said, what you do speaks so loud, I don't hear what you say. And I think that is apt for board members, that we must be role models. We must be seen to do what we preach. But coming back to your question, I think it is, Bwana Muchene talked about operating in the best interest of the company. Even when you are operating without term limits, when you actually believe you are the only person who can do this, and actually nobody else can, already you're not operating in the best interest of the company. Because, like I said earlier, the board and even senior management is really about human resources. It's about getting ideas. When you're a director in a company, yes, you need to know as much as possible in order for you to guide, but you'll never be an expert. In that organization. And even if you are an expert in one area, you'll not be an expert. If you are running Nation Media Group, you will not be a journalist. And at the same time, expert in journalism, and you are an expert on how this paper gets printed in the printing press. Yes. So what we are really talking about is somebody ensuring, first of all, as board that you, or even as management, that you've got the best people running the organization, and what you do is to coordinate them. Now, this task is evolving. This task is dynamic, whether it is for the board or for senior management. So it is very important that somebody does not do the same thing for a very long time. Because there will be, particularly in this day and age when there is evolving technology, yes. The way we were doing stuff yesterday is irrelevant. A good example is M-Pesa came in, and maybe many banks were still in denial because we've always done things this way. Until we said, hey, maybe it's high time we talk to those folks. Thank you. Because there's relationships to have, there's partnerships to have, and the ones who did it started reaping benefits. Now, you cannot do that if you're the same person who believes this is the only way we can do things. We need to change. So I support the thing about term limits. And actually, that is one of the things we can learn even from the public sector, because even the governance of this country has term limits.
Thank you.
And we have seen that happen.
Thank you. That is right. Briefly, as you're winding up, also strategy is very clear, and also we'll give you just a moment also to give your closing remarks, Catherine, as well. Muchene, very briefly.
Okay. Yes, I think there's need for a paradigm shift, focus a lot more on the future, make sure that we've got the right skills and competencies on board. But I think I should also mention that the role of being a director is a very onerous responsibility that comes with a lot of personal responsibility, because the individual is personally responsible for decisions of the board. You're putting your personal reputation online as well. So we've got to make sure that board members know exactly what role they have got and what tasks they're taking on board. And in case somebody is thinking that they can get insurance to cover them, that will not happen if you made a reckless decision.
Thank you.
So really important to have the right people on the board with the right skills and competencies.
Right. Very briefly, being pushed out by the director here.
Thank you very much. My final points are this: diversity without inclusivity is useless. So bring people on board, but include them in the discussion. Don't just tick the box. Bring women on the board, but let them be part of the discussion. Bring millennials onto the board, but let them be part of the discussion.
Thank you.
And okay, thank you.
Thank you.